Live in New York. It is Friday. Phew. It's the 15th of January, mid-month. I'm Richard Quest, and I mean business. Good evening. Minutes from now, the US President-elect Joe Biden will lay out the crucial second part of his plan to fight the pandemic. He's going to be announcing changes to the US vaccine rollout after already having called for a $1.9 trillion package in federal aid. That, of course, was done yesterday. Put together, and both measures aim to stem the crisis that he inherits officially 5 days from now.
I know what I just described does not come cheaply, but failure to do so will cost us dearly. The consensus among leading economists is we simply cannot afford not to do what I'm proposing.
Jeff Zeleny is in Wilmington, Delaware, with the president-elect. I can't think, maybe war, perhaps, but I can't think of any time when a president-elect has taken over having to have put in place such a detailed, full plan to rescue an economy whilst the incumbent is missing in action.
Richard, it was absolutely striking being in the room last evening with President-elect Joe Biden talking about, this $1.9 trillion plan. An incoming president would never, under normal circumstances, propose such a lofty price tag, something so big. But he said that is what is needed. And he framed it in terms of a moral imperative for this country to get things back on track. It is needed to do all of that. Now, of course, the prospect of Congress passing $1.9 trillion is fairly slim, but it's a very big opening bargaining point. And many Republicans actually agree with many pieces of this plan. But first and foremost is seizing this opportunity, changing the subject, trying to get the U.S. focus back on this deadly virus, which has really just increased every single week. As President Trump has been absent, saying zero, President-elect Biden is now front and center, inheriting all of this. So as you said, we are going to hear from him in just a short time, talking about the vaccination rollout plan. They're even scrapping the name Operation Warp Speed. They think that sort of is a bad connotation to all of this. So we are going to hear some sweeping vaccination rollout plans from Mr. Biden shortly.
Jeff, that's fascinating that they ditch the name. But it speaks to the difficulty Joe Biden now faces. On the one hand, you want everybody to forget about Donald Trump as fast as possible and concentrate on the job at hand. On the other, you have an impeachment trial. He is not going quietly into that good night.
He certainly is not, and that was one word, Richard, that was not mentioned last evening at all. And not surprisingly, of course, Mr. Biden is not going to be talking about the impeachment trial that he certainly did not look forward to or want, but there's nothing he can do to stop it. So the reality here is they are hoping that they can sort of operate, say, walk and chew gum at the same time, if you will, confirm Senate nominees in the morning and focus on, moving through this massive sweeping piece of legislation and impeach President Trump in the afternoon. It has never happened in the history of this country. It is extraordinary. We will see how this all goes forward, but certainly not the foot he was hoping to start his new administration on now in just 5 days.
Jeff, thank you. Jeff Zeleny is our senior Washington correspondent. As a business program, of course, we are now really getting to grips with Joe Biden's ambitious plans because they are signaling a U.S. return to demand-side Keynesian economic policy. Now, if you think of it as a pendulum going backwards and forwards, under President Bush, supply-side fundamentals ruled. I do beg your pardon. We seem to be a bit ahead. He called for lower taxes, less regulation, and cuts to domestic spending. Then, during the 2008 financial crisis, the pendulum swung the other way towards President Obama's stimulus package, looking modest by today's standards. It was only $787 billion. The fiscal conservatives howled at the time. Now take Donald Trump's tenure. And during that period, some of those Bush-era priorities returned. Congress slashed both taxes and regulations. Then the pendulum swings back again with Joe Biden's new proposals to put the massive CARES Act intervention from March, plus the smaller relief bill passed last month. It would make $5 trillion in stimulus since the pandemic began. Unthinkable just a few years ago. Jason Furman is the professor at Harvard Kennedy School, chaired President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, working closely with Joe Biden. All right, the pendulum. All right, are we supply side? No, let's go back the other way. No, we're now demand side. Monetarists, no Keynesians. This policy that Joe Biden is putting forward, albeit for valid reasons, Mr. Furman, does shift the economic philosophy.
Right. Well, Richard, this plan actually does include a huge thing to deal with the biggest supply problem in our economy, which is that there's a pandemic, $400 billion to open up the supply side of the economy through vaccination and testing. But I absolutely agree with you. And it's not just in the United States. Look at what the IMF is advising. Look at what the OECD is advising. Look at what the World Bank is advising. This is a Keynesian moment globally. You see finance ministers in capitals around the world rethinking some of the notions that previously had guided thinking about deficits and debt.
Well, you know, as the book says, up to a point, Lord Copper. It's fine to do Keynesian economics at a time of true disaster. But once this is sort of abated, does government maintain a greater role in the economy, Jason?
I think it does, Richard. I think people have seen what happens if you take a laissez-faire approach and a virus spreads everywhere. But, I want to take you all the way back to 2018. I mean, you gave a supply side story, but we had an increase in government spending, a cut in taxes, and a cut in interest rates. That looked in 2018 and 19 in the United States like we were responding to a recession. If you want these economies to grow, they need more demand. We've been chronically short of demand. With low interest rates, we can afford to supply some of that demand.
But I worry in this country that it's always more spending, and as the Republicans did it, less taxes. I mean, the deficit can rise when justified, but this country has a magnificent ability for the deficit to rise in all seasons.
Oh, certainly I wouldn't advocate $3 trillion of emergency deficit spending year in and year out. We've been in a very special situation. But Richard, we really, the mistake would be too much deficit reduction, too fast a return to austerity. We saw that after the financial crisis. I think it's widely acknowledged to be a mistake. So I don't think it's that politicians always run up the deficit too much. Sometimes they actually bring it down too much. That's what this plan would avoid.
We look at the various aspects of the Biden plan. Which do you find most important? Is it the help to states and cities, the 400-odd billion? Is it the insurance, the extra unemployment, 400 a week? What I realize it is a package of a whole, but if you dissect it out, what do you think is the most economically significant?
Number one, everything related to vaccination and testing, especially opening schools, really important for labor and the economy. Number two, unemployment insurance is very well targeted money to people who need it most. And finally, he included in there a down payment on a structural reform that would cut child poverty in half, with a child allowance of $3,000 a child. That frankly isn't the most important thing for the current emergency, but really critical for the long term in the United States.
So, Professor Furman, finally, you're back in vogue, or rather your party and your party's views are back as the policies of the day. Do you see yourself taking a role?
I will take a role by being on your show and talking to you and sharing my thoughts with the world.
Beautifully and diplomatically put. Jason Furman, it is always a treat and a pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you. We will be talking a lot more as the years go ahead under the Biden administration. Thank you, sir. And so to the markets. The US markets are down on the first day of trading since the Biden. That was a rather pathetic bell, wasn't it? Let's see. That's much better. The Biden proposal, down 100 points. We're well off the lows of the day. Falling from Friday's highs, the record. It's the third consecutive day of losses for the index.